Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. I'm Phil Song, a clean energy consultant of Asian Development Bank. As a track chair of this year's Asia Clean Forum, I'm delighted to welcome you all to this track 4, Financing Nationally Determined Contribution Actions, or NDC actions, which will be held in the next 3 days. As a result of COP26 convened last year in Glasgow, many countries, including those in Asia and the Pacific region, significantly raised their climate ambition by increasing targets to further reduce greenhouse gas emissions in their NDCs to achieve a net zero path by middle of this century. This calls for an unprecedented amount of climate finance that needs to be mobilized through various channels to turn the NDCs into reality, and thus the achievement of the climate goals set under the Paris Agreement. I remember an article that I read some time back, which estimated global investment requirements from the Paris Agreement to be well over $20 trillion by 2030. With many countries increasing their targets for further reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in their updated NDCs following COP26, the investment requirements would be even bigger by now, and unlocking access to climate finance of such a massive amount remains a major challenge for all of us. Against this backdrop, Track 4, that consists of 3 sessions, has been organized aiming to share and exchange ideas, thoughts, enabling policies, innovative financing and business models, and the state-of-the-art technologies, to name a few. The first session, which will begin right after my remarks, will share and discuss various public finance business models to support the Paris-aligned activities. The second session will be held tomorrow from 10:30 a.m. to 12 p.m. to discuss how to tap more private sector financing to support NDC activities. Given the huge investment requirements to implement the NDC activities, the public sector alone cannot meet the needs, and it is crucial to catalyze investments from the private sector as well. And this session will cover the issue. The third session will be held in the following day, Thursday, 16 June, from 2 to 3:30 p.m., which will talk about embedding climate resilience in financing NDC activities. Financing NDC actions is surely a huge task ahead of us, and we need to be innovative in our policies, business models, financing modalities, and technologies to meet the climate goals. In this sense, I hope that this track will have meaningful outcomes that may be shared with or replicated elsewhere in the world. I would like to conclude my remarks by thanking the Asia Clean Forum Secretary for organizing the sessions, and the speakers, panelists, and moderators for accepting the invitation, and also look forward to active engagement by all participants to make the sessions successful, coming up with innovative and integrated solutions for a low carbon and resilient future, which is the theme of this year's Asia Clean Forum. I wish you all have a most fruitful time and enjoy the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Pilbay, for the opening remarks. My name is Alfredo Baño, and I'll be moderating this session today on Paris-aligned public finance. I am working.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I'm working with ADB as a senior energy specialist in Asia region, and I'm involved through my work on developing energy operations across East Asia. Also, I've worked in other regions covered by ADB. For us, it's very important how our public finance is directed to achieve climate targets. In fact, all of our operations now need to be Paris aligned. And that's why it's so important for us to be ready to transform all our lending into Paris-aligned operations. Today we have a very interesting session with amazing experts. Our session will be structured in 3 presentations, then a panel discussion, and then Q&A, questions and answers from the audience that we'll be receiving through our chat box. And we will start with a presentation of 3 experts. The first one will be Ik Jin, who is Director General for Economic Analysis of the National Assembly Budget Office of South Korea, followed by Eva Oberender. She's the Interim Director General of the Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Partnership. And then finally, we have Fred Chang, who is the Managing Director of Womo Capital Partners. Each of them will have a 10-minute presentation, followed by a panel discussion. They will be joined by 2 other experts. The first one is going to be Ms. Yixin Yao. She is Senior Research Fellow at the Asian Development Bank Institute. And then Pradeep Bhattaral, who is Program Officer of the Prakriti Resources Center. They all will have a very lively discussion on the different aspects of public finance and their alignment with the Paris Agreement. And this will follow for about half an hour after the presentations. And then the last 10 minutes of the session will go for Q&A from the audience. Without further ado, let me start introducing Mr. Ik Jin, and he will start with his presentation. Ik Jin, as I mentioned, is leading the department responsible for analyzing and evaluating major national programs and estimating medium long-term fiscal demand for major national programs, including the programs to expedite transition towards a low-carbon economy, such as the new Green Deal in Korea. Ik Jin has also published several academic papers and industry reports that deal with the ESG investments and climate finance. He has earned a PhD in economics and also his CFA and CIPM certified. Ik Jin, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I would like to thank ADB and Mr. Song, the track, and Mr. I'm currently working for the National Assembly Budget Office, and the NABO is one of the non-partisan parliamentary supporting agencies. We provide value-neutral information so that the National Assembly can make informed decisions. Recently, the Korean government submitted the NDC following the Paris Agreement, and the Climate Response Fund is established to secure financial resources to achieve the NDC target. This experience, I think, is closely related to the session's topic, Paris-aligned public finance. Thus, I would like to introduce the Korean Climate Response Fund case briefly, and I will also discuss the possibility of streaming private ESG investing to public climate finance. In the National Assembly, society members compete for the realization of their own social values. Obviously, responding to climate change is also one of the most important social values. However, there is a wide range of differences among the society members in terms of priority, direction, and the speed of a response. The Korean government submitted a 2030 NDC. The target is 40% reduction until 2030 compared to 2018. There is considerable disagreement among society members right now on the appropriateness and the feasibility of this goal. So the NFV, called the Climate Response Fund, was newly established in this year to provide a basis for achieving the NDC goal. The fund aims to secure financial resources to effectively respond to the climate crisis and support the transition to a carbon neutral society. The fund's budget, 2022 budget, which is finalized after parliamentary deliberation, is about 2.7 trillion won. When discussing climate finance, we tend to focus on spending side. I mean, how to screen projects and how to implement them effectively, while putting aside the fact that the financial resources are not secured yet. Establishing an FP is a valuable achievement from the perspective of climate finance. But I believe it is more critical to manage NFP to be sustainable in the future. To continue to increase climate finance, it will be necessary to form a virtuous cycle of securing financial resources and screening climate projects, enhancing their effectiveness, and strengthening social support. From that perspective, I want to emphasize today that we need a plan to raise a required resources. We should accurately evaluate the effectiveness of climate projects, then elicit more social support based on the results. To that end, NFV can contribute to making climate finance a top priority among national policy agendas. First, let's briefly look at the revenue side of the Climate Response Fund. Article 69 of the Framework Act on Carbon Neutrality lists 9 types of resources for the fund's revenue. According to the competition presented in the 2022 Fund Management Plan, the largest portion is the transfer from the general account, followed by the KAU auction revenue and transfers from other special accounts, and deposits from Public Funds Management Fund. Here, our interest is whether the revenues of the Climate Response Fund continue to grow. Article 71 of the Act stipulates the transfers from general account 7% of the transportation, energy, and environmental taxes are allocated to Climate Response Fund. In order to this allocation ratio for the fund, we need a national policy priorities must be premised. That's one of the tasks we have to pursue. Next, let's look at the expenditure side. Article 71 of the Act lists 11 types of expenditures that the fund can use. According to the competition presented in the 2022 plan, the proportion of greenhouse gas emission reduction is the largest, followed by low carbon ecosystem creation, institutional foundation, surplus fund, and fair transition. Here, our interest is whether the current expenditure structure is appropriate to achieve the NDC goal. The Ministry of Strategy and Finance manages the general affairs of the fund, but the actual spending is controlled by 13 ministries, including the Ministry of Industry, the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport, etc. Such a double layer structure can be an obstacle to evaluating the performance of climate projects. In addition, many carbon neutral projects are still scattered in accounts and funds other than the Climate Response Fund. Thus, it is necessary to comprehensively consider the relationship between the fund project and other carbon neutral projects. On this slide, I listed critical tasks to make the fund sustainable. I address 6 elements: allocation, screening, governance, and technical advisory assistance. It goes without saying that all 6 elements will play an important role. But considering today's topic, I would like to emphasize the establishment of a sustainable public-private partnership. It is very important. Currently, as you see, the revenue of the Climate Response Fund relies on public finance resources. So it is necessary to utilize various financial instruments and vehicles to induce private sector participation. To this end, I think it is necessary to find a risk-sharing system to accommodate various types of private financial resources. We might need to employ complex financial instruments, combining grants, debts, and equities. And it is clear that the accumulation of private players' capabilities could accelerate the climate finance ecosystem. I think the ESG investing, which is naturally growing in private sector, can be a promising candidate for building up the PPP for climate finance. ESG investing aims for consider ESG issues together when investors make investment decisions. Both climate finance and ESG investing aim to internalize the externality generated by the climate change. The size of the ESG investment in the global financial market is estimated to be around $41 trillion. That is far exceeding the size of climate finance, estimated to be about $600 billion. The key is whether the NFV can serve as a conduit connecting ESG investing with the climate finance. It depends on whether NFV can successfully perform information production, screening, monitoring functions. Regarding ES pillar, the measuring, reporting, and verifying social cost benefit from the climate projects is critical. Regarding the G pillar, NFV must mitigate information asymmetry between resource suppliers and demanders. Let me conclude today's presentation by quoting Einstein's remarks. Climate change is the outcome of our economic activities. To solve this problem, we must revise our perceptions, goals, and behaviors different from the past. All of us who participate in ACF 2022 today will sympathize with the importance of climate finance. The current size of climate finance is still significantly insufficient compared to the required amount. So we needed to try a new approach if we want to break through leap. I suggest ESG investing could be a conduit to connect the broad-based financial resources with climate finance. Yeah, thank you for your listening. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jing. Very good, very nice presentation. I'm sure the audience has plenty of questions for you later on. We'll get to that in a little bit. But first we have Eva, who's going to be speaking to us about the blended finance for upscaling clean energy in Nepal, a program that she's been running through her organization. Eva is the Interim Director General at the Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Partnership, the so-called REAP. Prior to moving to Vienna in January 2012, she led REAP's Southeast Asia and Pacific Regional Secretariat based in Melbourne, Australia, where she was a vocal champion for renewable energy and energy efficiency policy in Pacific Island countries. In Australia, Eva worked for the Clean Energy Council and for the Federal Department of Environment on energy efficiency regulation before joining the Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Partnership in Vienna. Having worked in the private, non-governmental and the government sectors, Eva possesses a wealth of knowledge about the various needs and agendas of each of these sectors. Eva has a background in economics from her undergraduate studies in Prague, Czech Republic, and later again her master's degree in environmental policy in London. Eva, thank you for joining us today, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Alfredo, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody who has joined us. First of all, I'd like to thank ADB and your partners for the invitation as well as organizing this event. We all know how much effort goes into this, so congratulations on pulling off another fantastic conference. And secondly, thank you to all of you who have dialed in. We appreciate your time being here with us and your participation and your questions for the discussion. Thank you so much. My name is Eva Kelly. I'm the Director General of REAP. And today I'm going to be talking to you about a solution for small-scale renewable energy financing in a country of our choice, which is Nepal. So you have to shift a little bit your thinking from Ikchin's presentation from the trillions that they're deploying to millions that the small and medium enterprise sector in Nepal is requiring. But we certainly share some of the principles that Ikchin has been talking about, particularly about the risk sharing. A couple of words about REAP. We are a global multi-stakeholder partnership that develops and implements innovative financing mechanisms to develop clean energy markets, specifically for low and middle income countries. We work in the rural and peri-urban areas, and our medium to work is the small and medium enterprise sector. We are driven by impact, not only for our public donors, but also for the most vulnerable of the populations that we aim to service. We do this through principally three areas. Number one, results-based financing for off-grid companies. Our flagship programs is Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa, which has recently reached its goal of reaching 1 million Zambians getting access to clean energy. Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa is now expanding to additional 5 countries. So we're looking forward to delivering that impact to those countries as well. Secondly, we provide technical assistance through the Private Financing Advisory Network, which is a project origination and preparation facility. Through Private Financing Advisory Network, we have supported over 1,000 projects globally. 200 of those have reached successfully financial close and have raised $2 billion collectively. PFAN is hosting a couple of events this week, so I encourage you to dial into those as well if you are interested in this topic. Last but not least, we are working with financial institutions to support the development of a functioning local financial ecosystem, such as we're going to be talking about today on Nepal, but we also are having similar programs across the globe to support the shifts in the local financial system. Let's dive into the program that we have for Nepal. This is a very small facility. We are providing 750,000 euros funded primarily through the Austrian government. The principal idea behind this is to create innovative financing mechanism for small-scale renewable projects and to help Nepal achieve its environmental goals. And I'm very much looking forward to the discussion later on the overall Nepalese goals in this sector. We are, as I said, driven really by the impact, and the impact that we have through this facility is to deploy innovative financial instruments in Nepal, and by that shifting from grants and subsidies to credit-based financing for renewables. The secondary direct impact for us as our mandate is to reduce energy poverty, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and achieve socioeconomic benefits. We wouldn't be able to do this without solid partnerships in the country. We work with SNV on the technical side, with Alternative Energy Promotion Center as a strategic partner, and our principal partner for this facility is NMB, which is a commercial bank in Nepal. And I just want to spend a couple of minutes on this because they are really taking a fantastic leadership in understanding and trialing financial mechanisms to be able to deploy clean energy across the country, and we commend them all for the success that they've been having. We're not providing just finance, we're also providing technical assistance and capacity building to the AEPC, but also provincial energy units in the local governments, and specifically also to the local financial institutions. We've done a number of activities for them, but we also developed a number of useful documents that are all open source and available if you're interested. Really happy to share with you as well. For example, the handbook for what kind of financial instruments are available and how to deploy them, etc. The mechanism itself is a blended finance instrument, a credit guarantee fund for Nepal, and it is designed to mainstream commercial lending for small-scale renewable energy projects. And in doing so, as I said before, to shift from grants and subsidies-based project financing to credit-based financing for renewable energy projects. The way it works is that we provide a financial injection into a credit guarantee fund, which sits at NMB Bank directly in Nepal. We then, with our partners, originate and source projects that the project steering committee selects, and the projects then receive funding. Sometimes it's a direct, lending. Sometimes it's a wholesale lending. We've got a number of modalities that we can deploy. And REAP, or this credit guarantee fund, then takes 25% on the first loss on the defaults that would be presenting from this portfolio of projects. A couple of mentions around the portfolio that we currently have, just to demonstrate that there is a really high modality in terms of what kind of projects we can accept and support. We've got large-scale projects around biogas, but also very small run-of-river mini hydro project in a very remote area of the province in Karnali. And we are as much interested in the success of the large-scale projects or larger-scale projects as much as the smaller-scale projects, given the impact that it has on the livelihoods in those communities. The facility is up and running and accepting projects into the portfolio, and we are now looking at what is the next steps for our engagement, not only in other provinces in Nepal, but also in other countries in Asia. We're having conversations with specific countries around Southeast Asia. But also we are having some really interesting conversations with NMB on developing and implementing additional financial instruments. Most interestingly is also on the table hedging of exchange rate risk instruments, which are, as we know, very difficult, is a very difficult issue for anybody who works with international finance, whether it's on the financial institution level or also on the SME level, this is a really big issue that we're all trying to solve, and we don't have any solid and affordable solutions at the moment. So in summary, I'd like to leave you with three things. Number one, there are solutions that are viable for the small-scale renewable energy sector, including countries like Nepal, that are scalable and that are replicable. And I encourage you to give us a call and have a chat if you would like to understand how we pull this off and how this can be done. Secondly, money is not enough. Technical assistance and capacity building really takes you to the next level and provides the long-term engagement that we're all looking for and the long-lasting impacts that we're looking for. And thirdly, local partnerships such as the established commercial bank, NMB, and locally established technical organizations such as the AAPC and SNV are key to success. Thank you so much. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Eva. Great presentation. Very interesting how Nepal, as representative of low-income countries in Asia, are dealing with this situation and how Paris-aligned public finance can help them through a number of instruments. Very good. I'm sure we'll have plenty of questions for you as well. Now we're moving on with Fred Chang. We'll have a look at the perspective of private sector and particularly venture capital. So he will be making a presentation on closing the NDC fund gap, how private public sector cross-border venture capital funds can help. So let me introduce Fred. He is the managing director of Cuomo Capital Partners. He combines over 25 years of venture capital experience, including intellectual property investing and startup company experiences in the US, as well as in China, where he has conducted cross-border investments and helped build the businesses for international venture capital and intellectual property investment firms, as well as emerging climate tech companies. He started his career in McKinsey in Great China region practice, where he participated in a 30-year energy and environmental policy project in Taiwan. Mr. Chang's professional experience also includes General Electric corporate venture capital in Silicon Valley and the US and intellectual ventures in China. He attended Beijing University, the University of Michigan, and the Wharton School of Business, where he received an MBA and MA in entrepreneurial finance. Fred, please, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Alfredo, and thank you to the ACEF for this opportunity to share with you how we're working to finance innovative sustainability and low carbon technologies. As a venture capitalist in the private sector, working with government organizations in the public sector, we found a way in Asia to solve some of the challenges clean tech innovators are facing when they are trying to commercialize their technologies and scale them up. We've done this by taking an intellectual property or IP-driven approach and leveraging the Asia-Pacific region as not just a mere destination or recipient of low-carbon innovations, but actually as a co-commercialization location. So in this talk, I will share a couple of case studies that highlight how we can leverage what we have here in APAC to close the NDC funding gap and to help commercialize and deploy clean tech solutions at scale. Okay, so we know that the climate challenge is a global problem. So wherever technologies are developed, they actually need to be deployed worldwide and shared. So while inventing and commercializing new technologies is hard, there are numerous clean energy solutions already available in the world today, and many new ones being developed every day. So for us in APAC, it's less about inventing new ones here, but more about how we can leverage what's been developed in the West to commercialize, scale up, and deploy them across borders here into our region. As many of you know, for clean tech innovations to succeed, they usually need to go through not just one, but two commercialization valleys of death. Moreover, for clean energy technologies that are really industrial tech or hard tech, these valleys are deeper and wider, meaning they're more capital intensive with longer time horizons. In fact, clean tech is more similar to biotech or pharmaceutical drug development than it is to your traditional high-tech social media or internet type companies, which often take just a little bit of money and can scale up quickly. But in biotech, we know that it takes over a dozen years and well over $1 billion to commercialize these technologies. So as with successful biotech commercialization, climate tech commercialization requires a specialized group of investors and stakeholders working differently than they have traditionally financed these technologies, and in concert across the whole innovation cycle to bring these solutions successfully to market. Here, I will posit a counterintuitive claim and solution, and that is in APAC, we can be a good place for shallowing out and shortening the second valley of death. And we'll illustrate this with a couple of case studies of good technologies that were invented in the West, struggled to commercialize there, but when they came to Asia, they were able to commercialize faster and with less capital. So of course, if we're going to commercialize low carbon technologies in APAC, we need to get them here first. Technologies can actually be transported across borders, but it depends very much on how the technology's underlying IP rights, its economics and value are protected, shared, and structured. So that sounds a little complicated, but this is done primarily through licensing contracts, and it's done very broadly in the biotech arena. If you follow the biotech news, you might read on a daily basis that some pharmaceutical company in Asia has in-licensed a drug from a owner like Pfizer or Merck in the West to co-develop, produce it, and sell it in their country. And similarly, for climate tech innovations, it can be done such that there's mutual benefit to the Western IP owner and the APAC co-development or co-deployment partner. And that's because in Asia, we have large, faster growing markets that are still industrializing, and that creates additional market opportunities for these Western tech owners. But Asia also represents a favorable location to accelerate commercialization and then allow these technologies to go back out and become mainstream and global one day. And we've seen examples of this in solar panels, wind turbines, and electric vehicles. So to finance these cross-border tech projects, this requires a global financial system with investors who understand how to invest in what appears to be risky and more complicated cross-border deals. There's actually a new breed of private equity and venture capital investors who specialize in cross-border investing because they've developed ways to mitigate the investment risks and to structure deals amongst various stakeholders to provide attractive returns and reduce risks that are appropriate to them. And so these specialized investors can actually fill the gap in the global financial system to facilitate cross-border financings of sustainable solutions. So how do they do this? In brief, they conduct three kinds of activities. And this requires first, the technology having a willing customer, a host, or deployment partner in APAC. And this can be done similarly to how engineering firms integrate and sell their technology solutions. But as we may often face with these engineering companies, they tend to work on infrastructure projects or mature technologies. So for newer, more innovative technologies, you need an additional layer of IP deal structuring and licensing.
Yeah, apologies for that. Fred just dropped and he's back with us again.
Okay.
Fred, are you up? Okay, we can see you.
Yep.
So let's change to him. Yeah. Okay, continue, please. Thank you.
I'll continue. So as I was saying, for newer, less mature technologies, an additional layer of IP deal structuring and licensing is needed. And the end user who in a APEC country may want to be, yep, okay. Okay, are we back up? Okay, sorry about that, the network connection. So as I was mentioning that aside from having a host partner in an APEC country to do the deployment, oftentimes you need the IP level structuring to mitigate some of the risks of adoption, as well as to share the ownership and future value of a technology's dissemination in a country to allow these early adopters to be willing to co-develop the technology. And then finally, the third piece is to tailor the financing to these type of projects. This means bringing in a syndicate of private and public sector financial investors, such as early stage VCs, local industrial companies, and government-related organizations. So now that I've briefly shared the building blocks of successful cross-border financing, let's talk about how this has successfully been done with a couple of success cases. The first one has been ranked by Biofuels Digest International as one of the top green fuel startups for several years running. And it is now a unicorn preparing for a multi-billion-dollar NASDAQ listing. This startup has discovered how a microorganism or bacteria can ferment the waste flue gas or carbon polluting emissions from industrial processes, specifically steel plants, and turn that waste gas into valuable ethanol and other chemicals. It was originally developed by a university professor in New Zealand who couldn't get co-commercialization partners and funding, so he went to Silicon Valley and got one of the most famous clean tech investors. But even after that, they struggled to attract further financing and commercialization partners, and were actually on the verge of going bankrupt. So to turn things around, they came to China, then Korea, Malaysia, and India, where they found welcoming host co-commercialization partners and investors. So the first lesson here is that in these large and fast-growing industrial markets in Asia Pacific, it helps these companies spread out and share the development costs to multiple partners. And these partners oftentimes have state backing, and so there's a mandate to deploy these kind of technologies and can tap into public financing. So having secured these industrial host partners, then the financial community, driven of course by financial returns and having to structure the risk properly, were more willing to invest in these risky deals and found the overall deals attractive. So the second lesson here is that in the Asia Pacific region, we can have early adopters willing to roll out at large scale industrial technologies that are often not favorably seen in North America or in Europe. Oftentimes it's because we have government, public, private sector investors willing to work together. So today the company has, as customers and investors, many of APEC's largest steel companies and some of the world's leading private sector VC investors in Asia, Europe, and the US. And now they're preparing for a $2.5 billion NASDAQ listing. The second case study is a company that has been recognized as the European Clean Tech Deal of the Year by the Clean Tech Group in 2017. But it's actually somewhat of a misnomer because their success was due to coming to Asia for each step of their evolution, from commercialization to scale up to their €1 billion exit. This company was originally a mid-sized German automotive company that had developed a fuel-efficient powertrain and was not doing so well in Europe. So they decided to move to China and focus on this market. But like many Western companies coming to the region, they struggled initially until they found in the local government a partner for providing subsidies, factory facilities, and connections, as well as financing. And this literally helped them retool their factory so that they could find early adopter local automotive customers. And in turn, this attracted VCs from both Europe and China. So the lesson learned here is that local governments, especially those who have high-tech industrial parks with mandates to promote and support new innovative clean tech, can provide financial and in-kind financial resources to help companies like this. So they've now quickly scaled up and were subsequently acquired by a Hong Kong conglomerate for 1 billion euros, showing that clean tech companies can also achieve unicorn status in a short few years, giving returns to their investors in the millions of dollars. So the lesson learned here is that many industrial companies in Asia Pacific are seeking to acquire emerging technologies representing a lucrative and early exit for innovative technology companies from outside of the region. So in closing, I'd like to point out that these two success cases actually struggle to find co-commercialization opportunities and sufficient funding in their home countries. And that's been generally true in the clean tech space. However, because they came to Asia in time, they turned around and have now become very successful. So from these case studies, we can see how countries in the Asia Pacific region can serve as a complementary solution partner to commercializing and scaling up global sustainability solutions, often faster and more economically. So I hope I've dispelled the notion that APEC is just a mere recipient or destination for deploying mature sustainability solutions. So in a short presentation like this, it's not so easy to go into too much detail. So I'd be happy to answer questions or speak offline about how the specifics of this kind of IP cross-border approach works. Thank you.
Okay, Fred, thanks a lot. Very interesting. Surely we'll have more questions for you later on. Now it's time for us to start the panel discussion. We have two newcomers on top of our three great presenters. I have Ms. Yixin Yao and Mr. Pradeep Bhattarai. So let me introduce them first, and then we'll kick off the panel discussion. Dr. Yixin Yao, she's a senior research fellow at the research department of the Asian Development Bank Institute, our sister organization working on research in parallel to ADB. Before that, she was the director in charge of sustainable development and sustainable infrastructure projects at the Department of International Economic and Financial Cooperation of the Ministry of Finance in the People's Republic of China. And she was responsible for preparing the country partnership strategies with the World Bank, ADB, and bilaterals like KfW, also the OPEC Fund for International Development and governments of Austria and Israel. She was also leading all the strategic cooperation and loan negotiations related to the PRC ADB, PRC KfW, PRC Austria, and all the different strategic partnerships, the annual country programming, annual country investment project planning, and portfolio reviews. Amazing curriculum and great responsibility working for the MOF of China dealing with sustainable infrastructure projects indeed. And with us, we also have Pradeep. He's a program officer at Prakriti Resources Center. He has a degree in environmental management, and he's very passionate about environmental conservation and climate change work. He has a very long experience working on climate change issues, especially in climate finance, mitigation, and adaptation. He has continued following the climate change budget on the national budget of the country and tracking the flow of climate finance in Nepal. He has contributed to many publications, such as the fact sheet on climate change budget of federal and provincial climate relevant budget of Nepal, international aid and climate finance in Nepal, and direct access finance climate actions in Nepal. He has also experience in following the NDC process in the COP progress. Currently, he's engaged in the multi-actor partnership for implementing NDCs with 100% renewable energy for all project in the PRC. Well, we have very good 5 panelists and a very interesting topic to discuss today. Perhaps let's start with the last newcomers who haven't spoken yet. And let's kick off with Dr. Yixin. And let's hear from her, considering that, excuse me, considering she has been involved in developing all the partnership strategies with all the development organizations and development partners between China and ADB and World Bank and others. All those projects, all those programs related to sustainable infrastructure have some challenges related to how they are aligned to carbon peaking and carbon neutrality. We'd like to hear from her about what is the relation and how China has been handling this challenge. Dr. Yixin, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to share some of my experience here, and it's very impressive. I heard of all these presenters on their views, and I'm really glad to hear the example from Korea, Nepal, and also colleagues located in Shanghai. And from my point of view, I think the closing gap in green financing is a big issue. And maybe learn some case study from China MDB Corporation. And for interest of time, maybe I no need to elaborate. I just I have some points here to share with you. First, I would like to share with you 5 pillars of green financing in China right now. Actually, I'm not representing the central bank, the central government of China. I just represent myself. Right now, I'm the research fellow, senior research fellow in ADBI. And previously, I'm working for MAUF and also work on green financing policies. So from my point of view, right now, the 5 pillars of green financing in China. First is accelerating the establishment of a green financial standard system. And second is continuously strengthening of information disclosure requirements and financial institution supervision. Third, gradually improving the incentive and restraint mechanism. 4 is to enriching green financing, financial products and the market system. Number 5 is depending of international cooperation in green financing, multilateral and bilateral. I will elaborate the number 5 a little bit later. And then when we look forward, I also think about the next step on green financing in China. So I list 5 of them. Maybe it's not so correct just from my point of view, and we can discuss it later if you are interested. First is building a long-term mechanism and improving design of financial support for green and low carbon transformation. Number 2 is to improving green finance standards and promoting carbon accounting by financial institutions. Number 3 is innovating in the area of green financial products and service and building a multi-level green financial market system. Number 4 is to preventing financial risks related to climate change. And number 5 is promoting local financial reform and innovation pilot, supplemented by international cooperation and participation in global climate governance. So for interest of time, I would like to highlight the international cooperation between China and the MDBs. Actually, China benefited from a lot from the MDB PRC cooperation projects. Looking back, we have a lot of climate change, or we can call it green financing projects, supported by PRC ADB, PRC, World Bank, and GEF, and a lot of multilateral international financial institutions. And also we have some very good bilateral partners on green financing. For example, KfW from Germany, and also AFD from France, etc. Actually, if you ask me, say something, what is the benefit, most benefit from for China from this PRC MDB international cooperation? I would like to say first, of course, is financial support is money. Actually, the important partners for China to reach its ambitions are the international financial organization, including ADB, World Bank, etc. And when we look back past decades, most of the PRC ADB investment projects are climate change related. For example, on long-term low greenhouse gas emission development strategies, which include energy efficiency, clean energy, low emission transport, low carbon cities, climate-related technology, investment in climate and clean energy projects, and knowledge sharing on climate change with other developing countries. And when we look at closing the gap in green financing, I would like to highlight some projects. The investment, from my point of view, actually the investment needs to achieve the SDGs in developing Asia, including China, is huge and beyond the capacity of the public sector alone. Thus, private capital is essential to close the funding gap. So just like Dr. Fred Chang just presented, yes, we can find that we would like to have much more public-private sector cooperation projects. With help of MDBs, including ADB, we already have a lot of that kind of projects. And the challenges, as we know, for the private sector, it may facing much more challenges, such as reputation risks, information asymmetry, and higher transaction costs. And all these elements limit the private capital's participation in green investment. And they are a cluster of PRC ADB green financing cooperation investment projects implemented in China since 2016. And this innovative financing mechanism and approaches highlights the catalyzing international investors as multi-layers and de-risk and fostering risk sharing, enhancing transparency and lower transactional costs by offering incentive and aligning financial policy and regulations to NDCs. And for interest of time, I could not highlight many projects, but when we look at the website of ADBI, if you just search China and search the clean energy, such kind of keywords, you will find a lot of. So when we look back, the implementation and the lessons learning from this project, we think money is important, but the knowledge sharing is also very important for China. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Yixin Yao. Very comprehensive response indeed. There is, of course, country like China, who is one of the largest economies in the planet, has to have a very different approach to what smaller countries and lower income countries like many in our region have. And that's why we like to ask Pradeep, the experience in Nepal. As a very small country wedged in between India and China, difficult place to work because of the mountains, limited import and export capacity. Could you describe to us perhaps the availability of domestic and international funds to support implementation for Nepal's NDCs? And what are the main channels that you see through which these funds can be channeled? Maybe government programs, civil society, private sector, PPPs. Please, your views would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, moderator, and thank you all presenters for a very informative presentation. And I'm pleased to be here. And thank you, organizer, for providing me this wonderful opportunity to share my knowledge and my work on the financing NDCs in Nepal. Before going to your questions, first of all, I would like to share some major points from the NDC of Nepal. So government of Nepal has submitted its second NDC in 2020, and to the UNFCCC. So in its NDC, Nepal has covered a different sector, mainly focusing on short-term the short-term targets that are going to be achieved by 2025 and medium-term by 2030. So basically, the NDC has covered different sectors such as energy, waste, agriculture and forest, and land use. So in the subsector of the energy, so government has mainly targeted on the energy generation and the transportation and residential cooking and biogas. So these are some of the major sectors that NDCs has covered. And Nepal government has also targeted to achieve the net zero emission by 2045. So for these, to achieve these targets, government mainly government need to escalate its actions, climate actions, major focus on the mitigation. For this, government has targeted to generate the 15,000 megawatt of electricity by 2030. So in which 5 to 10% will be generated from the mini and micro hydro, solar, and biogas energy. So from overall, like 15% will be the share from the clean energy, clean and renewable energy source. So to achieve these targets, the government alone cannot do this, because due to the limited resources, due to the technical difficulties, and the economic and the social status of our country. So for this, Nepal need to access a lot of funds from the international source that are channeled from the UNFCCC and from the other source. So to achieve this NDC, Nepal has forwarded, like it is estimated that around 28.4 billion USD will be required to achieve the targets that are set on the NDCs. So in which is almost 90% of the total Nepal's GDP. So for this, around 25 billions are the conditional mitigation targets, and rest of the 3.5 billion USD is the unconditional targets. So if we see, government has planned, and government has also prepared the NDC implementation plan, in which the government has clearly shown how these targets will be achieved and from where the finance will be accessed. So basically, like government of Nepal has started started to allocate its own budget on the annual budget and plan. So if we see that budget, like 5% of the total budget is allocated under the climate finance, so climate change budget, so which is more focused to achieve the climate actions, so both for mitigation and the adaptation. Beside this, the government has accessed different funds from the international source, example, Green Climate Fund, LDC, Least Countries Development Fund, Adaptation Fund, and also from the different bilateral and multilateral funds, like different donor agencies, and also from the different INGOs and the private sectors. So in Nepal also, the different private sector are working on the energy sector, in the energy sectors. And I would like to I would like to present here on the status on fact that the study done by the Prakriti Research Center shows that the various donor committed USD 1.92 billion for the around 609 climate-related projects in between 2013 and 2017. So out of which 563 million USD is allocated for the mitigation activities. So rest of the around 640 USD is allocated for the adaptation activities. If we see the activities of the projects of Nepal, many climate-related activities are more focused on adaptation activities because we don't have a much to reduce our emission. But there are a lot of things we need to do to protect our community from the adverse effect of climate change, because the intensity of the climate change is increasing day by day. So this shows that there is a large gap in between the required fund and the available fund that Nepal is accessing from the international source and the allocating from its own budget. So all this shows that Nepal need to strengthening, or Nepal need to increase the access of fund from the international source. So, but there are some challenges to access that funds, because Nepal has a limited capacity, the limited institutional capacity, limited financial capacities. So recently, government of Nepal has accessed a fund which is directly related with the mitigation activities from the Green Climate Fund, which is of total of 21.1 billion USD from GCF. So government has also accessed from the two other projects from GCF, but which is related with the cross-cutting areas that are on the mitigation and the adaptation both activities. So this fund, that 21.1 billion USD, will be more focused on for strengthening the clean cooking solution in Nepal. And but still there are a lot of challenges that Nepal is facing, the countries like Nepal is facing. If we see the funds, so there are the criteria and the access modality is very difficult. And with the complex approval process from those countries like Nepal are not getting a lot of fund due to their limited financial and institutional capacity. Another things I want to add is a different fund, including the GCF, they require the co-financings. And the countries like Nepal cannot, or it is very difficult to manage the fund from its own source. So the country need to source or continues to manage the co-finance from the donor agencies. So which is which is adding challenges for accessing the climate finance from the international source. So I would like to I have to close my remarks here. And if there are other questions, then I will be happy to share later. Thank you.
Very good, Pradeep. Thanks. Very comprehensive response. Indeed, the access to finance sources and are always an issue, particularly for small countries like Nepal. But also, I'm very curious about how Korea and through the Climate Response Fund, how they're handling their sources of revenue and their funding. And also very important is how they monitor and track how the fund use the proceeds for climate focused activities and whether those have an impact. Perhaps Sigjin can bring some light into this.
At the moment, the Climate Response Fund is heavily relies on public resources. Actually, rather than discovering new resources, we collect resources that were scattered across other accounts, and we gather the various resources into a single vehicle. The reason why we approach this way, it took 2.5 years to establish the NFP in Korea from the beginning to this year. So we tried to shorten the preparation period. And as I showed during the presentation, the largest portion from the revenue comes from the transfer from the general account. That revenue is transportation, energy, and environmental taxes. It is levied on the amount of gasoline and diesel exported and imported. The issue is this act, the act to support the tax, this kind of levies is just valid in temporary. So it could be an issue. The revenues from these resources would not be sustainable for the climate response fund. And another resource is that KAU, the Korean Allowance Unit Auction Revenue. Some experts expect that KAU's price would fluctuate severely as the national greenhouse gas emissions approach the 2030 reduction target. In sum, we need to conduct a review on whether the financial resources are sustainable in the mid to long term. This is why I suggest exploring new resources, including ESG investing, which is growing fast in the private sector. And one more point I'd like to emphasize that during the presentation, I introduced the two-layer structure of the fund. While 30 ministries manage actual climate projects, the Ministry of Strategy and Finance oversees the general affairs. We expect in this double-layer structure, the Ministry of Strategy and Finance could effectively oversee the monitoring and tracking system. In addition, we established the fund as a control tower to coordinate many carbon neutral projects. If it succeeds, then it might contribute to making proceeds from the fund activities flow back into the subsequent the carbon neutral projects. In sum, again, this is the initial stage. We have just established the fund, and we're gonna monitor the effectiveness of the projects conducted by the fund and try to enhance the whole system. And we try to various activities and to, what can I say, that build up the carbon neutral ecosystem in the very short time. This is my answer for your question.
Very good, Ikjin. Thanks. Very clear. And indeed very challenging to be able to track and monitor such a large fund, and particularly when it's being handled by another agency. We've suffered that in ADB as well through our monitoring system. Sometimes it's tricky to handle all the different impacts that the various operations have related to climate. Now I would like to go back to Eva. And in her presentation, she mentioned that they transitioned their fund from a grant to credit-based financing. And I'm sure that was something very tricky to do, because when you're using grant money, everything is much easier. But suddenly when you have to borrow it, things get more complicated. And as working for a development bank, we see that very often. Perhaps you can speak to us about those challenges and how the fund has been handling them.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Alfredo. So the principal challenge here is common to all of our speakers here today, and that is, I think it was Fred who was outlining the financial flow plumbing, where we will see more climate finance in the top layer in the big trillion and multi-million-dollar funds, and being able to disaggregate that funding and allow that access to the small and medium enterprises to that funding is very, very tricky. And I predict that this is going to get even worse in the next 5 years as more financing becomes available. And so our aim in this financing facility was to create a locally based solution with a progressive bank that would be willing to take up the appetite to lend into those small scale projects and create a reasonable level of support that would, on one hand, reduce some of the risk of the local bank, but on the other hand, also take some ownership and some drive to succeed. So in Nepal, we were able to find this balance around the 25% on the first loss. In other countries that we work in around the country, around the globe, we get requests for 100% first loss guarantee, which then doesn't really become a market-based commercial solution, but we see it as a first step, but not really a workable solution. But we are really, really lucky in having the partners in NMB Bank who is really interested and willing to go and pilot and figure this out. And we also are really lucky having a decent project pipeline that feeds into that guarantee fund and that is able to support the projects that have been waiting for financing for some time. We require around 30% of collateral, which again is a reasonable request. Around the globe, we have seen banks requiring 120% of collateral from small scale projects, which is really, really difficult then to access the financing. Yeah, thanks.
Excellent, Eva, thank you very much. And Fred, back to you. And I'd like to touch upon this very different way of financing that you use, the IP-based approach. And how, maybe you can give us some more examples of these clean energy technologies that use the IP-based approach, and how can they be used in more lower developed economies? As you know, some of the countries that you mentioned are almost developed ones. How can we use this in countries like, Nepal, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, some of the very poor or lower income countries that we have in our region?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Unfortunately, I have not deployed our technologies to the smaller countries, and that's partly because the Western countries that have developed these technologies often have trouble securing large-scale financing, and so when they come to Asia, they're looking for financing. However, having said that, we have seen technologies that would be quite appropriate for smaller and more developing countries like the ones you mentioned, especially technologies that come out of, let's say, university labs in the what I'd call resources access, like water, energy, trying to, let's say, turn waste, municipal waste into heat and then energy. Oftentimes those technologies are smaller, made in a modular fashion, like in a container, and with solar panels that make it standalone off-grid. And so those technologies are looking for trial customers on a smaller scale, rather than going to places like Korea and China, where sometimes the scale of the technology needs to be, very large and industrial for attracting the various stakeholders. So we have seen those kind of technologies in waste to energy, recycling in general, like from tires to carbon. So those are things that could be appropriate for this region.
Very good. Thanks, Fred. And in fact, I would like to touch upon the waste to energy projects. And, somebody from our audience highlighted to us that the European Union now is not considering for climate finance. Those projects are related for waste to energy incineration projects. The reason behind is because those projects essentially promote burning rather than recycling, and that's why it was taken away from the EU taxonomy. ADB has also been considering this issue, and we are already taking a pause on financing waste to energy projects that involve incineration, and we are developing a guidance for our projects. I wonder how you see, perhaps this can go to any of the presenters as well, how you see this type of projects that are not considered climate aligned anymore, and whether there is a possibility of adjusting them or getting to them some financing that could be considered, Paris aligned. Maybe Fred, you can.
Okay, sure. So, incineration, of course, creates its own pollution. And because of that, when we came across other technologies, we tried to address that head on. And so, for example, there was a company that does what I call supercritical water. It's very high temperature, high pressure that can, in essence, I shouldn't use the word incinerate, but destroy all the material without any waste and create heat. And this was a technology that the Gates Foundation invested in, and it's in a modular container fashion. And some of that technology, not this particular company's, but this kind of technology was originally developed in the United States, the NASA program for basically destroying all kind of waste in space, where of course you have to turn the waste into some kind of usable energy. And so if you can commercialize some of that as a replacement solution to traditional incineration, that is something that can be rolled out in lower developed countries as well as in large countries like China.
Great. Maybe somebody else have any comments on the waste to energy projects? How do you guys see it? If not, we haven't received more questions from the audience. I think they're a bit shy this afternoon. But I have some questions from my side. And it raised a little bit about, obviously, how ADB is trying to support this Paris alignment of our own financing. Do you have any tips or any pieces of advice that we should consider on top of what we are already doing through our private development, private sector operations department, or public financing, PPPs? We are quite active now in some countries. Any suggestion that we should consider? Any feedback? Don't be shy, please.
Yeah, look, I'm just going to reiterate one more the request that I have made earlier, and that is to the agencies like yourself, which are handling large amounts of funding. You really need to be watching on how that funding is trickling down to the backbone of the economy, which are small and medium enterprises, because I believe that the barriers of accessing that funding are going to become even more difficult and bigger. So I really would like to appeal to those of you, including Jane, with those trillions of dollars and trillions of fundings, that you watch on how this is coming down to small and medium enterprise level, and what mechanisms you can deploy to make that access easier. As I said, looking at currency exchange rate hedging is something that both the financial institutions on the local level as well as the small and medium enterprises on the local level are grappling with on a daily basis, and it's costing them a huge amount of opportunity. And it's something that currently we don't have a good and affordable solution to. So that's also something that you could be looking into. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. I agree. Yes, Yishin, yes, please.
Okay. I noticed that you asked me one question about the cluster of ADB PRC projects. Actually, I put the link of this to the Q&A box, chat box. And you can find there is a article written by me and other two colleagues supporting the blue skies through green development goals. And in this article, we elaborate a little bit on the cluster of the ADB PRC project
BTH,
on green, BTH and other. They have around 8 projects actually in this cluster.
Yes.
So ADB provided around 2.5 billion US dollars, starting from 2015 to 2020 to support China. And air pollution is one of the biggest challenges we are facing. So this project, this cluster of project use different kind of innovative modalities to help different kind of provinces and including some banks and enterprises, yes, to help them to finance, to do some green financing project. And I can elaborate it into 3 levels. First is strategic level. So for the central government, actually, we have 5-year plan every 5 years. The number 13th and then number 14th 5-year plan, actually, we already learned from the ADB PRC and also World Bank PRC cooperation. And some of the advanced ideas, conceptions come from this cooperation, this strategic level. It means the central government really cherish about the policy proposal put forward by the MDBs, including ADB. And then it is an implementation level. When we have some project, actually, if we work with MDB, including ADB, we accept a lot of innovative designing. And then the implementation process of this project also should follow some kind of safeguard policies and ESG and these kind of things to help us to really have a green project. And for interest of time, I will not highlight all these innovations and also the modalities, different kind of modalities. And it is some kind of tailor-made modalities to different projects. So if you have time, just take a look at this article and then maybe you understand. And then the 3rd level is knowledge sharing level. Actually, I think when we want to do something, money is important, but money is not enough. The knowledge sharing is another very important. And just like other colleagues highlight, that capacity building is very, very important. So after all these projects completed, we always say that the PRC ADB cooperation project give us opportunity to training our colleagues to be like people who understand the conception and would like to create other green financing projects by themselves. So that is the 3 level I would like to highlight. Yes, strategic.
Thank you, Yixing.
And implementation
Very
level.
interesting.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, we have been involved on the BTH program for a long time, since 2013. We have a very good experience there. But I agree also with Eva that depending how the financing works and how we are structuring it, you're working mostly through SOEs, large infrastructure companies, and little of that funding actually reaches the SMEs and the micro SMEs, particularly in some countries. Also, some of the funding that we get from PE or venture capital, many of capital markets are not accessing or are not supporting developing countries in developing Paris-aligned interventions. We have seen that in Nepal, they are not reaching some of the funding that they would need. There is a huge gap. And in Korea, we have very large funds managed at the top level of ministries. But as we can see, it's going to be very challenging to implement and to channel all that funding with enough impact and with enough effectiveness. So all of this shows us that big work that we have ahead of us, the big challenges that we have to address and to overpass. And essentially, ADB and other development partners working on all developing countries in Asia in collaboration with organizations like RIP, bilaterals like KfW, COPCA, and CSOs and NGOs. All these organizations are going to be partnering with all of us to be able to channel properly all this climate financing and to be able to get all that money for climate finance and Paris-aligned interventions, which is what we are badly in need. Particularly, and I will close with this, in a time that interest rates seem that starting to pick up in the Western world, essentially, maybe we'll reach Asia soon, but definitely funding will be more and more expensive. And that's when our organizations are able to starting to make a bigger difference, because we are able to get that money to the people that need it. Thanks a lot for your participation. It was great to have you. Very interesting. Very grateful for learning from your expertise. And I hope you see you around. And thanks a lot again. And I'll close the session now. Thank you. And